Thank you guys so much for coming today and joining me on a little bit about cortisol. For those of you that don't know, my name is Sandra Duarte. I am a biomedical engineer on paper, but a holistic health enthusiast at heart. I was in the medical device product development industry for a couple years, and I'm now starting my own company called Realign Supplements, where I really prioritize all natural ingredients that are good for your body. So all the good stuff, none of the bad stuff. And this company really started with my passion for holistic health, which started at the age of 19 when I was rushed to the hospital with blood clots. I had 5 major blood clots, both in my lower extremities and in my lungs. So I had an emergency procedure to get my heart to start working again. I was in the ICU for a couple days, and I was blessed with another chance, which I'm grateful for every single day. Unfortunately, when I left the hospital, I was given some bad news, and that was that because I had experienced these blood clots, I was at a higher risk of getting diseases down the road. Now, being 19 and being healthy, being fit, being a student athlete, and being someone that really prioritized eating well, I thought I was doing everything I possibly could do to be healthy. So this came as a huge shock to me. I went home that day and I did everything I possibly could to learn all about diseases and how to prevent them in the future. Now, during my research, I came across a path of medicine that was called holistic health or holistic medicine, which is essentially where you're healing your body naturally without the use of pharmaceuticals. And your aim is to get your body back to its natural, healthy state. Holistic health and holistic medicine has been a huge part of my life ever since, and I'm happy to say I'm very healthy with no health concerns now. And I really have been trying to share my message ever since and how to heal your body holistically and naturally. From any diseases that you may be experiencing now to any diseases that you may be experiencing in the future. Over the years, I have researched a lot of subjects and holistic health in regarding to those subjects. So it could be gut health, inflammation, endocrine disruptors, to what we're talking about today, which is cortisol. So cortisol is oftentimes known as the stress hormone because it's released at times of stress by your adrenal glands. Now, because it's a stress hormone, or known as the stress hormone, it's considered bad. But what if I told you it could be good for you? What a lot of people don't realize is that cortisol is super essential for your body for it to function properly. So we need cortisol in order to form memories, in order to reduce our inflammation in our body. So it regulates inflammation, blood sugar, blood pressure, and metabolism. And that's extremely essential because high levels of blood pressure, blood sugar, or inflammation can later lead to diseases down the road. Additionally, it is extremely important for your immune system. If you have dysregulated cortisol levels, then you are probably going to be getting sick pretty often. Or if you are sick, then you're going to be sick for longer periods of time. Now, before I get into how we make sure that our cortisol levels are regulated, I want you guys to open up your brochures to that middle page. I have a couple graphs over there. That graph number 1, if anyone doesn't have a brochure, you can raise your hand. We'll get you one. I think everyone should have one. There's some other seats in the front if anyone wants to sit down. All right, so we have that first cortisol pattern. And that first one shows high levels of cortisol at the time of waking and decreasing levels during the day. The second pattern shows low levels of cortisol in the morning and higher levels of cortisol at night. And then that last third pattern really shows pretty stable cortisol levels throughout the day. So now I want to see what you guys think is the healthiest or the best cortisol pattern out there. With the raise your hands, can I see who thinks it's cortisol pattern number 1? Okay, I got a couple people. What about cortisol pattern number 3? What about number 2? Okay. Raise your hand if you're not going to be raise your hand no matter what I say. Thank you for being honest. Appreciate that. All right, so I know there's a huge emphasis nowadays on lowering our cortisol levels or stabilizing our cortisol levels. So that leads to a common misconception that we should be aiming for cortisol pattern number 3. I know that most of the room voted for cortisol pattern number 3, and that is actually the unhealthiest pattern to have. Yeah. There was a study done on this, actually, and quick note, pattern number 3 is called extreme adrenal fatigue pattern. So there was a study done on this pattern and on all cortisol patterns out there with a total of over 4,000 participants. Those participants were tested 6 times a day to check their cortisol levels. About 8 years later, those participants were followed up with, and 190 deaths were found. Now, what that study found was that out of those 190 mortalities, the highest of them were cardiovascular disease. The study went to also find that the majority of those cardiovascular disease patients that had passed away had a cortisol pattern that looks like cortisol pattern number 3. So it summarized and it found a huge correlation with cortisol pattern number 3 and having a higher risk of mortality due to cardiovascular disease. So let me repeat that. That cortisol pattern number 3 with pretty low levels of cortisol throughout the day has a higher risk of cardiovascular disease mortality down the road. That's the number 1 killer in America. So with that being said, who thinks that cortisol pattern number 1 now is the best one or the healthiest one to have? Who thinks it's number 2?
So the difference between 1 and 2 is that 1 has the higher in the morning, and then the other one's higher at night?
Yes. Yeah, so what this lovely lady just asked was the difference about cortisol pattern number 1 and cortisol pattern number 3, or number 2, excuse me. Cortisol pattern number 1 has high levels of cortisol in the morning and low levels at night. And then number 2 has low levels in the morning and then high levels at night. So cortisol pattern number 2 is actually adrenal fatigue pattern. It's just a less severe case of it than pattern number 3. So the reason we want to be avoiding this pattern is because one may feel a variety of symptoms, which is essentially your body not functioning properly. So those symptoms can include fatigue, tiredness, no matter how much sleep you get, weight gain that you can't lose, anxiety, depression, just to name a few. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering what adrenal fatigue is at this point, since I mentioned it 2 times already. Well, it's when your adrenal glands aren't communicating properly with your brain. And the reason this is important is because we need that proper communication in order to be resilient to stress and in order to be able to adapt to it. And why is that important? Well, if we have high levels of stress for prolonged periods of time, then that's going to lead to inflammation. And when we have high levels of inflammation, we're going to have a higher risk of diseases down the road, just like that cardiovascular disease. So a lot of people will come to their doctors with these adrenal fatigue symptoms, and their doctor will think that the thyroid is the issue. Now, although the thyroid has like a dysregulation to it, that is true. That is not necessarily the root cause of these symptoms. So what doctors will do is they will prescribe medication to try to treat the thyroid, but all they're doing is really putting a Band-Aid on what the root is. They're just putting a Band-Aid over the symptoms, but not treating the root cause, meaning that your body is still not functioning properly, and it's going to lead to more diseases down the road. All right. So, how are we going to regulate our cortisol levels now? There's there's several tools that we can use really, but I'm just going to go through the main ones. So I'm going to be here all day otherwise. There are some tools that are extremely important for morning during the day, and then some that are extremely important for the evening. The one thing to really know and to think about cortisol as is not really a stress hormone, but a hormone that it stimulates movement and gives you energy. And now having that energy at night is not beneficial because that's when we're supposed to be winding down and going to sleep. High levels of cortisol or dysregulated cortisol levels will lead to disrupted sleep patterns, and we need our sleep because that is when we are repairing ourselves and healing our bodies. Now, not only is sleep super important, the amount of sleep you get, but also the quality of sleep. So some tools that you can use in order to have healthy sleep, but also to regulate your cortisol levels, are avoiding your phone as soon as you wake up. So how many of you hear your alarm clocks in the morning, you roll over, turn it off, and go immediately on your phone to go on TikTok or Instagram or check your emails? I know a majority of you, let's be honest. Even I do it sometimes, although I try not to. Checking your phone immediately in the morning, especially answering messages, answering emails, and checking social media is going to spike your cortisol levels, and your cortisol levels are going to stay spiked through the remainder of the day. You're going to be in that stress state constantly. Next up is getting sunlight 30 minutes after waking. Getting that sunlight is going to help regulate your circadian rhythm, which is going to help you have a consistent sleep-wake pattern, which will give you better quality sleep, and you'll be able to sleep for longer periods of time without waking in the middle of the night. And then next up would be meditation, cold showers, and sauna use. And those are all really important to do in the morning because it helps you relax and it helps you adapt to stress for the remainder of the day and become very resilient to it. And then lastly would be movement, which is so important for endorphin release. And movement, once again, it helps you become more alert, it helps you have more energy, and it once again makes you more resilient for stress throughout the day. Now, our daily practices, there are some things that we need to be very conscientious of during the day. And I know it's super hard to make some of these choices, but one of the most important things you can do for your body and regulating your hormones is having a proper diet. That means eating a whole food diet because processed foods are not meant for your body to digest it. A lot of these processed foods that we have nowadays in stores, they have toxins and chemicals and additives in there that your body cannot digest or is not used to digesting. So it's doing more energy trying to digest all those foreign chemicals in your body now. And if it's using all that energy to try to digest something, then it's not going to have the energy to be more resilient to stress, and then your cortisol levels are going to be all out of whack. Another thing would be not skipping meals and overeating at meals. So we really, really want to avoid that. And the way you can do that is by eating until you're only 80% full. If you're overeating at meals, or if you're undereating during the day, you're once again putting your body in a high stress state and dysregulating your cortisol levels. And then lastly is minimizing stress. And I know a lot of us have a lot of stress in our daily lives, whether it's from work, relationships, friendships, or just anything that life throws at you. And it's really important that we are able to adapt to that stress easily and try to calm our nervous system as much as possible in order to regulate those cortisol levels. Now, one way we can do that is breathing, breath work. And so I want to lead you guys through a breathing technique that I use when I am feeling a little stressed out or maybe a little anxious. And that is 2 inhales in and one extended exhale out. So you're going to go 1, 2, and then breathe it all out with a long exhale. So if you guys can try that with me. Okay, take 1 breath in, another breath in, and then a long exhale out. Good. Let's try that one more time. Inhale in. One more time, inhale in, and then exhale out. So that really slows down your heart rate and it helps you bring more oxygen to your brain, because when we're stressed out and when we're anxious, we start breathing really rapidly and we're bringing more CO2 to our brain. So we really want that oxygen instead. And then lastly would be our evening routine. So once again, avoiding those phones, avoiding blue light, that means TVs, phones, any of that stuff, and then avoiding harsh artificial lights, which is what most of us have in our homes. Instead, I would recommend swapping those harsh artificial lights with red lights instead. So I like to turn them on about 1 to 2 hours before bed, and it creates a soothing environment that will regulate your circadian rhythm and tell your body, hey, it's time to go to bed and time to calm down a little bit. Yeah, you can just buy a red light bulb. Yeah, that's awesome. There's also salt lamps you can buy on Amazon, and so I have a salt lamp it's like a night light salt lamp in my bathroom, because I go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and I don't want to be wide awake. So that really, it gives off enough light where I can see where I'm going, but not enough to wake me up. And then the last thing I recommend for evening routines, you guys are going to hate me for saying this, I already know it, is limiting caffeine and limiting alcohol. And when I say limiting caffeine, I don't mean completely eliminating it, but limiting how much you have during the day and really stopping your caffeine intake at least 8 to 10 hours before bedtime, so that it doesn't disrupt your circadian rhythm and you can have proper sleep, so you can heal your bodies and not have to deal with these diseases and illnesses down the road. And then limiting alcohol. I know this one's tough for a lot of people, but I highly recommend completely cutting out, because there's really nothing beneficial in alcohol. If you cannot do that, then I just recommend cutting it out 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, I have a glass of wine, I fall right asleep. Like, what are you talking about? And I know you do. I know most people fall asleep right after they have a drink or two. And although you fall asleep pretty quickly, that does not mean you have quality sleep. So essentially what alcohol does is it prevents you from getting that REM, or that deep sleep. And REM sleep is extremely important. That's when your body is healing itself. All right, so to wrap this up, I want you guys to go to your brochures one more time. And there's a cortisol check in there. We're going to go through it. And for each box that you check, I know most of you probably don't have pens, but you can mentally check it. For each box that you check, you're going to give yourself 1 point. All right? So let's get started. If you experience this pretty often, that's not like, oh, I experienced this one time before. I experienced it one time every 3 months or so. This means on a daily basis or on a weekly basis you experience this. So, cravings for sweet or salty foods. Who has cravings for sweet or salty foods? Probably the majority of us. Give yourself a point if that's you. Carries more fat in abdominal area. Difficulty losing weight. Bloating, constipation, or gastrointestinal issues. Jittery, and eating will relieve that jitteriness. If you drink more than 2 caffeinated beverages throughout the day. You're dizzy when standing up from a lying position, you're lightheaded, or have fainting spells. You have blurry vision. You have brain fog, difficulty concentrating, memory problems, or poor decision making. You have muscle or joint aches or pains or muscle weakness. You have irritability, anxiety, or depression. You have fatigue and you're always tired or exhausted no matter how much sleep you have. You have difficulty falling, staying asleep, or you're always waking up feeling exhausted. And for women, mostly women here, irregular menstrual cycles, low libido, or reproductive issues. So how many of you didn't get any points whatsoever? Raise your hand. How many of you got 2 points only? How many of you got 6 points? 6 and under. Each box is 1. How many of you had 10 and under? Okay. Yeah. How many of you had 14 or less? How many of you had more than 14? Good, because there's only 14 on there, so you should only have 14. All right, if you guys had 2 or more points, then those are signs that you may have dysregulated cortisol levels. Now I know what you're thinking. You're probably like, Sandra, after just saying that, you just raised my cortisol levels a lot. Well, I'm happy to share you can lower those cortisol levels with those tools I provided you guys with. And there are so many other tools out there, but those are the most essential ones. And I'm happy to share them afterwards with you guys if you're interested, like cycle syncing for women. That's a really popular one right now. But there are also, if you flip to the back of your brochure, I put some companies out on there, and you can go get testing if you or someone you know, you're suspicious that you guys might have dysregulated cortisol levels, or if you're just curious what your cortisol levels may look like, you can go get testing. And if you're like me, who is absolutely terrified of needles and wants to stay away from labs and clinics, don't worry. There are companies out there that I listed that provide at-home saliva tests, so there's really no excuses. I did leave a lot of time at the end. I know this was pretty short, but I just there's so much information with cortisol, and I wanted to share the main points with you guys, and I wanted to leave time for anyone that's maybe a little worried or just wants to talk to me more about their own personal experiences. I know that's not necessarily comfortable sharing publicly, so I wanted to create that space and time for you to be able to do that. So I can talk to you guys a little bit about it, or if you're interested with working with me in the future. Otherwise, I hope you guys have an amazing Saturday and a great rest of your show. Thank you.